The cold ocean wind slapped Mark Donovan in the face as he pulled his beat-up Ford Escape to a stop in front of the faded gates of his childhood home. He turned off the engine and froze for a second, gripping his fiancée Hannah Bradley's hand tightly in his sweaty palm. "You ready?" he asked, not daring to look up at the worn-out front porch. "We'll get through this, Mark," Hannah said softly, giving his fingers a reassuring squeeze. Mark took a deep breath, braced himself, and pushed open the heavy gate. It creaked so loud in the still air it sounded like a warning. "You're not welcome here." He hadn't been home in over 8 years. When his father died of a heart attack, Mark hadn't even come back for the funeral. And his mother, well, she never forgave him for that. They spoke through third parties, neighbors, cousins, the occasional Facebook message, but never face to face. Until today. Today, he wanted to start fresh, introduce Hannah to his mom, make peace, try to build something new on the ruins of the past. He opened the squeaky front door and stepped inside with Hannah. The air smelled like old wood, dust, and a strange mix of cinnamon and something bitter, like lingering arguments. "Mom, we're here," Mark called out, forcing a smile. A dull thud came from the kitchen. A moment later, Martha Donovan appeared in the hallway. She tossed a kitchen towel onto the table, shot a quick glance at her son, and then froze when she saw Hannah. Her eyes narrowed. The warmth vanished from her face in an instant. The tension that filled the room was so thick, Hannah nearly stepped back. "You?" Martha rasped. Hannah went pale. Her hand trembled in Mark's grip. Mark frowned, confused. "Mom, this is Hannah. My fiancé," he said, feeling an old anxiety start to rise in his chest. "We brought your favorite, blueberry pie with maple syrup. Thought we could sit down, catch up." But Martha was staring at Hannah like she was a ghost, her lips pressed into a hard line. "Make some tea in the kitchen," she said, her voice like ice. "I need to talk to Hannah. Alone." Mark opened his mouth to argue, but the look in his mother's eyes stopped him cold. Raised to respect her wishes no matter what, he just nodded. "Okay. But don't be long. All right?" Hannah glanced at him, worried, but Martha had already motioned sharply, "Come here," like Hannah was a misbehaving child. When the door to the living room shut behind them, Martha spun around, her face stripped of any pretense of hospitality. "What are you doing here?" she snapped, her voice as sharp as a blade. Hannah lifted her chin, even though she was shaking inside. "I'm here with Mark. We're getting married." "No." One word shot like a bullet. "You're not marrying my son." Hannah gritted her teeth. "You don't get to make that call." Martha crossed her arms, her glare pinning Hannah in place. "You think I don't remember you? You've changed, sure, but I'll never forget who you were." Hannah's face went white, her hands clenched into fists. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice barely steady. "Oh, I'll remind you," Martha hissed. "You were the troublemaker who had the whole neighborhood on edge, missing stuff, lies, stirring up drama in every damn family you touched. I watched you wrap my older son, Dave, around your little finger." At the mention of his name, Hannah flinched. Mark's older brother? Dave, the one who died in that car accident. She'd been 16 at the time. Martha stepped closer until they were nearly nose to nose. "I blamed everyone but you back then. Big mistake. Now I see everything crystal clear." The floorboards creaked outside. Mark was back, hovering near the kitchen door. He caught the scene just as Martha loomed over Hannah, her body stiff with anger. "What's going on?" Mark asked, his voice wary. Martha didn't even glance at him. "Son, you're making a terrible mistake. This girl wrecked our family once. She'll do it again." Mark looked from his mother to Hannah, his face draining of color. "Mom, stop. You're wrong. Hannah's here because she wants to be part of our family. Because she loves me." "Love?" Martha barked out a bitter laugh. "That's not love, Mark. It's just destruction wrapped up in a pretty bow." Hannah stared at the floor, heart hammering in her throat. Mark stepped forward and wrapped his arm around her shoulders. "I trust her. Not you." The words hit Martha like a slap. She stumbled back a step, as if Mark had physically shoved her. "Choose," she said, voice shaking but defiant. "Her or me." The silence that followed was deafening. The old clock on the wall ticked in the heavy air, each second slicing deeper into the moment. Mark ran a hand down his face, then turned to Hannah, his decision clear. "Let's go," he said quietly. Without a backward glance, he led her out the door. leaving Martha standing there alone, surrounded only by her old bitterness and regrets. The door slammed shut behind them. Martha sank onto the sagging couch like something broken. Outside, the wind rattled the bare branches of the old maple tree, and inside, the only sound left was the echo of her own breathing and the heavy, endless silence. Hannah couldn't even remember how they made it back to the car. It wasn't until Mark slammed her door shut and rounded the hood to climb into the driver's seat that she realized she was curled up, trying to make herself invisible. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice barely holding together. "It's not your fault," she murmured back. Mark stared straight ahead at the empty road, lit only by the pale glow of a street lamp. His hands gripped the steering wheel so tight his knuckles turned white. "She never changes," he said finally. "I was stupid enough to hope that if I brought you home, if she saw how happy we are, she'd accept it." Hannah stared out the window at the dark silhouette of the house, the same house where she had spent most of her childhood hiding from the world. "I knew she hated me," Hannah said, finally finding her voice. "I just didn't think she'd remember everything." Mark turned to her. What was she talking about, Hannah? About Dave? About wrecking the family? Hannah closed her eyes. The pain she had buried for years cracked through her like a dam about to burst. "It was so long ago," she began, choosing her words carefully. "I was 16. I lived with my grandma on the other side of town. My mom, she wasn't really in my life. She'd disappear for weeks and come back with fresh bruises and new guys. Grandma tried her best to keep me from following the same path, but she trailed off, the memories flashing behind her eyelids like a bad movie. That's when I met Dave," she said, her voice rough. "He was older, good-looking, popular. He treated me like I mattered, not like I was some piece of trash." Mark stayed quiet, letting her talk. "We started hanging out. He'd take me to diners, movies. We used to dream about leaving this crappy town together." She gave a bitter little laugh. "Only, I didn't know it was just a game to him. Just another way to rebel against his mom, who thought he was her perfect golden boy." Mark's jaw tightened. "One night, he took me to a party. There was a lot of drinking, a lot of strangers, and something went wrong. He left me there, alone. After that, the rumors started. Gossip spread like wildfire. His mom found out and decided I had set him up to seduce him or humiliate him or whatever twisted story she told herself." Hannah's voice cracked. Tears clung to her lashes. "After that, Martha forbade him from seeing me. Dave started drinking heavy. One night, driving home from another party, he wrapped his car around a tree and died." Hannah's fists clenched in her lap, and from that day on she blamed me. Mark dropped his head, voice low. "I remember, she blamed everyone. The cops, his friends, you. I was just a kid, but even then, it felt wrong." Silence fell between them, heavy and raw. The past, like a ghost, filled the car with its cold breath. "She never once asked me what really happened," Hannah said quietly. "She just needed someone to blame. It was easier that way." Mark looked at her for a long time. "You think if she knew the truth, it would change anything?" Hannah shook her head. "No. It's easier for her to cling to her story. That way she doesn't have to admit she broke her own son." The car was filled with a heavy silence, broken only by the whisper of the wind outside. Finally, Mark turned the key, killing the engine. "Let's get out of here," he said quietly. "Where?" Hannah asked, lost. "Anywhere, as long as it's far from this place." They ended up at an old roadside diner, Mel's Diner, off the highway. The place smelled like fried pies, burnt coffee, and that weird mix of cheap hope and broken hearts that hung in the air 24/7. Mark ordered 2 coffees and a couple of cheeseburgers, because neither of them could remember the last time they'd eaten. As the waitress clattered dishes somewhere behind the counter, they sat in a booth tucked into the corner by the window. "I'm not going to let her ruin what we have," Mark said, his voice firm. "And what if she never accepts us?" Hannah asked, her eyes still red and swollen. Mark reached across the table and took her hand. "Then that's her loss, not ours." Hannah smiled through her tears, the first real smile all night. "I love you, Mark." "I love you, Hannah." The coffee was bitter, the food dry, and the neon sign outside buzzed and flickered like it might give up any second. But in that moment, in the middle of an ordinary American night, the world felt a little bit lighter. Whatever the future held, they had already made their choice. together. Hannah woke with a start, a prickling feeling running down her spine, like someone was watching her. She snapped her eyes open, but the motel room was empty. Dim streetlight leaked through the thin curtains, and the old AC hummed quietly in the corner. But the unease stayed. She sat up, pulling the thin blanket tighter around her shoulders, listening. Mark was sound asleep on the other bed, one arm dangling over the side, breathing slow and steady. "You're just being paranoid?" she told herself. But deep down, she knew. The past wasn't going to let them go that easy. She didn't fall back asleep that night. Morning hit them like a slap when the motel phone rang sharp and loud. Mark fumbled for the receiver, still half asleep. "Hello?" There was only silence at first, then a whisper, so faint it barely sounded human. "You betrayed your family." Mark jerked the phone away like it burned him. "Who is this?" But the line was already dead. Hannah clutched the sheet tight in her fists. "That was her, wasn't it?" she whispered. Mark nodded grimly, staring at the phone like it might bite. "I think so." Hannah jumped up, throwing clothes into a bag with frantic energy, like every second wasted could cost them their freedom. "We can't stay here, Mark. If she knows where we are—" "I know," he said, pulling her close. "It's gonna be okay, I promise." He tried to sound sure, but Hannah saw it. The same fear that had taken root in her own chest. Half an hour later, they were already tearing down the highway, leaving behind the town that used to be home and had turned into a trap. Hannah stared out the window, watching dusty fields and rundown gas stations roll by. Every place they passed felt like it had its own little story, stories of people running, trying to survive, hanging on to forgotten dreams. She knew they couldn't run forever. But right now, they had no choice, especially not with Martha Travis out for blood. They ended up in a tiny town called Silver Creek, the kind of place you could blink and miss if you weren't paying attention. Mark found them a little rental through some last-minute app, a small white cottage with a bright red door and a wild, overgrown lilac bush out front. "Seems quiet enough," he said, scanning the empty street. Hannah shrugged. "For now." Inside, the house smelled like fresh paint and new wood floors. The windows creaked when the wind pushed against them, and an old cat lazily prowled behind the fence. For the first time in days, life felt almost normal. Almost. That night, after they finished unpacking the basics, Mark said, "We gotta start fresh, find jobs, build a life, no looking back." Hannah nodded, but deep down she knew the past wasn't done with them yet. Martha wasn't the kind to forgive or forget. The past was like a splinter buried deep under the skin. You could ignore it for a while, but sooner or later you had to dig it out. "I'm gonna check out the local store, see if they're hiring," Mark said, grabbing his jacket. "You wanna come?" She shook her head. "I'll stay. Finish settling in." As soon as the door closed behind him, that creeping, raw vulnerability washed over her again. Alone with the silence and the ghosts in her head. She decided to take a quick walk around the yard. The gravel crunched under her shoes. The lilac smelled like childhood, bittersweet, heavy with some kind of sorrow. As she passed the mailbox, something caught her eye. A white envelope, no stamp, no address, just shoved into the slot. Her name was scrawled across it, neat and careful. "Hannah." Her hands trembling, she tore it open. Inside, a single line. "You can't hide from the truth." Hannah's heart slammed against her ribs. She spun around, scanning the empty street. Nobody. Not a soul. But someone had been there. Someone knew exactly where she was. Someone was watching. And Hannah realized one terrifying truth. Running was no longer an option. When Mark got back, he spotted the fear in her face before she even spoke. "What happened?" She silently handed him the note. Mark read it once, his jaw tightening, then crumpled the paper in his fist. "That's it," he said, voice like steel. "We're done hiding." "What are you talking about?" Hannah asked, panic rising in her throat. "We're going back," Mark said. "Straight to her. End this, once and for all." Hannah stared at him, feeling ice spread through her veins. Back there. Back to where she was hated. Back to a place where every memory cut like a knife. "We'll face it together," Mark said, steady and certain. "I swear, Hannah, I won't let her hurt you. Not ever again." And for the first time in what felt like forever, Hannah believed him. Maybe, just maybe, they had a fighting chance. But deep down, she knew. The hardest battle of their lives was still ahead. The night in Silver Creek was darker than usual. The moon hid behind thick clouds, and the air hung heavy and damp, like the sky was holding its breath before a storm. Mark's car rumbled quietly down the empty road, its headlights slicing through the darkness, catching glimpses of overgrown weeds lining the shoulder. Hannah sat in the passenger seat, clutching her jacket tight against her chest. Her hands were shaking, not from the cold. They'd made their decision. Going back to the town that once felt like home meant walking straight into the pain, the fear. But maybe, just maybe, finding the answers too. "You sure about this?" Mark asked, glancing over at her. Hannah nodded without even looking his way. She wasn't sure. But she knew one thing. Running wasn't an option anymore. They drove in silence for almost an hour before familiar sights began to appear. The old railroad bridge, rusted-out billboards, a rundown gas station barely hanging on to life. The town welcomed them back like they'd never left. "First stop, her place," Mark said, his voice steady. "She needs to hear it straight from us." Hannah gave a small nod. Martha Travis's house sat at the edge of town, right where the woods began. An old two-story place with peeling paint, a sagging fence, and a swing creaking slowly in the breeze. Hannah knew that house too damn well. Once, she thought those walls would keep her safe. God, how wrong she'd been. Mark parked the car a few houses down. "On foot," he whispered. "Quieter that way." They moved along the cracked sidewalk, grass forcing its way through the broken concrete. Everything about this place felt like stepping straight into a memory. As they got closer, it was clear. Someone was waiting. Martha sat on the porch, alone, like she knew they'd come. Old, brittle, her gray hair pulled into a tight bun, those same cold, empty eyes. "Took you long enough," she said, her voice slicing through the night air. Hannah clenched her jaw. She had 100 things she wanted to scream at her, but the words stuck somewhere deep inside. "We need to talk," Mark said, stepping forward. Martha gave a dry laugh. "About what?" "About the past," Hannah managed, finding her voice, "and how you wrecked it." Inside, it smelled like dust, dying flowers, and rotting wood. Martha waved them toward the living room, the same one that had once been filled with laughter, then screams. "You both betrayed this family," Martha said, crossing her arms tight against her chest. "You, Hannah, by refusing to obey, and you, Mark, by choosing her over blood." "Family?" Mark let out a bitter laugh. "You call that family? Fear, beatings, humiliation?" Martha stared him down, her voice icy. "That was order. Without order, people become nothing." Hannah's hands curled into fists. "You destroyed me. With your words, with your fists, you made me believe I was worthless." "Because you were weak," Martha replied, like she was stating a fact. Hannah felt something spark inside her, a fire she thought she'd lost long ago. She wasn't that scared little girl anymore, the one Martha could crush with a look. "No, Martha, I was a kid, and you were a monster hiding behind the word family." Silence slammed into the room. For the first time, Martha looked away, and right then, Hannah knew they were winning. "We didn't come here for forgiveness," Mark said, "or for answers. We came to tell you, you don't get to control us anymore. You'll never be rid of me," Martha hissed. "You're my blood. You carry me inside you." "No," Hannah said, voice steady. "All we carry is the strength we built in spite of you." Mark reached out and grabbed her hand, and together, without looking back, they walked out of that house. Outside, the night smelled like lilacs and rain. "What now?" Hannah asked, staring into the darkness. "Now?" Mark smiled. "Now we live, for real this time." They walked down the empty street, slowly, feeling the weight of the years slip off their shoulders, leaving only a faint, almost bearable ache behind. The past would always be a part of them. But that's all it was, a part, not a life sentence. For the first time in forever, the road ahead was wide open, and they were finally free. Hannah jolted awake, like someone had grabbed her by the shoulder. The first pale light of dawn was creeping through the grimy motel window where she and Mark had crashed for the night. The dreams still clung to her like smoke. She was back in that living room, with Martha whispering words of pure venom in her ear. "Hey, it's okay." Mark's voice came from beside her. He was already up, pulling on his jacket, his face set and focused. A lot had changed overnight. They weren't scared kids running from nightmares anymore. Now they were walking straight into them. "We need to talk to Charlotte," he said. Hannah frowned. Charlotte Blake, their mom's old friend from way back when things first went wrong. She knew too much, maybe even more than she ever let on. You think she'll even talk to us? Hannah asked, pulling on her worn-out jeans. Mark gave a crooked grin. After everything? She owes us. The drive to Charlotte's felt like stepping straight into the past. Dusty back roads, beat-up trucks parked on patchy lawns, white picket fences flaking with age. Small-town America, where everyone knew everyone and nothing ever really got forgotten. Charlotte's house hadn't changed much. Neat little yard, a pair of rocking chairs swaying slightly on the front porch. But the air around it felt different. Heavier. When Hannah climbed the steps and knocked, the door cracked open almost immediately. Charlotte stood there, older now, hunched a little, her face lined with fear and something deeper, weariness. Hannah? Mark? Her voice shook. We need to talk, Hannah said, her voice steady. Charlotte stepped aside quickly, glancing around like she expected someone to be watching. Inside, the house was cozy. The walls were crowded with photos, weddings, graduations, Christmas mornings. Charlotte handed them each a cup of coffee in mismatched floral mugs. I knew you'd come back someday, she said quietly. Then start talking, Mark said, leaning forward. No lies this time. We need the truth. Charlotte clutched her hands together, her knuckles pale. Your mom, Martha? She was broken long before you were even born. Her father, he was a cruel man. She grew up in all that ugliness. It's all she ever knew. We're not looking for excuses. Hannah cut in. We're here for the parts you didn't tell us. Charlotte sighed, her eyes flickering to the floor. Your father, Mark stiffened. What about him? Charlotte's voice dropped to a whisper. He didn't die in a car crash like you were told. A cold wave rolled through Hannah's chest. He left, Charlotte said. Ran from Martha, from all of it. He couldn't protect you, so he ran like a coward. Mark's fists clenched. Where is he now? Charlotte shook her head slowly. I don't know. He went south, last I heard. Tried to start over somewhere, without you. He abandoned us, Hannah said under her breath, the betrayal burning through her. And yet deep down a tiny voice whispered, what if he regretted it? What if he looked for them all these years? The sky was bruised gray when they stepped back outside. We gotta find him, Mark said firmly. Hannah nodded. She knew it too. If they were ever going to be free, really free, they had to close every door the past had left wide open. All of them. That night back at the motel, Mark was glued to his laptop, digging through old records, public archives, dusty phone books from the middle of nowhere. Hannah flipped through a stack of yellowed newspaper clippings. One in particular caught her eye. An old article about a fire at Martha's house, years after they'd fled. They'd never known the details before. Now they did. Martha had lost everything. Everything but her hatred. Hannah laid the paper down on the scratched-up table. We need to stay sharp, she said. She's not done. I know, Mark said, looking up at her, but neither are we. We're not the same kids we were. Still, somewhere deep inside, Hannah felt it. The worst battles weren't fought with fists or words. They happened inside you, in the places no one else could see. Outside, a storm had blown in. Rain hammered the motel's tin roof, lightning slashed across the bruised sky. Hannah stretched out on the bed, staring up at the ceiling. Her mind kept circling back to her father, who he really was, who she might have become if she hadn't gotten out. The road to freedom was messy, dangerous, hard as hell, but it was hers, and she was going to walk it all the way through. For herself, for Mark, for every kid who'd ever been betrayed by the people who were supposed to love them. They found him in Texas. A dusty little town on the outskirts of Dallas, buried under sandstorms and forgotten trailer parks. Richard Brooks, their father, he lived in a beat-up RV surrounded by empty beer cans and broken memories he could never quite outrun. Hannah stood at his door, clutching an old photograph in her pocket, the one where little girl her sat laughing on his lap without a care in the world. You ready? Mark asked quietly. Hannah nodded. She was ready. Ready to hear the truth. Ready to ask why he left. Ready to finally close this chapter. An old man with tired eyes opened the door. He recognized them immediately. Hannah? Mark? He breathed, like he was seeing ghosts. Hey, Dad, Hannah said, her voice shaking, but she forced a smile. Richard stumbled back a step. We're not here to fight, Mark added quickly. We just want the truth. Richard sank into a battered armchair, motioning them to come inside. The trailer reeked of old cigarettes, cheap booze and stale air. Faded posters of classic rock bands hung crooked on the walls. Richard stared at them like he was looking through time. "I didn't leave because of you," he finally said. "I left because of her. Because of Martha." Hannah clenched her fists. "You left us, Dad," she said, voice steady. "You left us with her." Richard buried his face in his hands. "I was a coward. I knew she'd hurt you. I just thought if I wasn't around, maybe it would get better. Maybe she'd calm down." "You knew what she was doing to us," Mark said, standing up, too angry to stay still. "I knew," Richard whispered. "I knew, but I was too damn weak to fight back. So I ran. I left you to fight alone." The silence was suffocating. Hannah looked at the man who used to be her hero, now just a broken, hollow shell. And still, some part of her wanted to forgive him. Some tiny part still hoped. "We didn't come for apologies," she said firmly. "We came to tell you. We survived." Richard's eyes, rimmed with tears, flicked up to meet hers. "We got strong," Mark added. "In spite of you. Not because of you." Hannah placed the photo gently on the table. "That's all that's left of that family." And they walked out without looking back. The road home stretched out before them. They drove in silence, the hum of tires on asphalt their only soundtrack. Texas plains rolled endlessly under a burning sunset sky. And then, out of nowhere, a vehicle appeared in the rearview mirror, a black SUV, new, sleek, flashing in the dying light. Mark stiffened. "This doesn't feel right," he muttered. The SUV stayed on their tail for miles. When Hannah turned off the highway onto a deserted back road, the SUV followed. "Maybe it's just a coincidence," she said, trying to convince herself, but deep down, she knew better. It wasn't a coincidence. It was Martha. She knew they had found him. She knew they were trying to leave the past behind. And she wasn't done with them yet. When they hit a dead stretch of abandoned warehouses, Hannah slammed on the brakes. "That's it, I'm done running," she said. Mark nodded. The SUV stopped behind them. Martha climbed out, just like they remembered, cold, sharp, hardened by years of rage. Only now, she looked older, smaller somehow. "You think you can just walk away?" she hissed. Hannah stepped forward. "We're not kids anymore, Mom. You don't scare us." "You belong to me," Martha snarled, taking a step closer, but Mark moved between them. "No, we belong to ourselves." And for a heartbeat, something shifted. Martha saw it, that look in their eyes. Not fear, not submission, strength. She faltered. For the first time, she faltered. And Hannah knew. They had already won. Not with fists, not with screaming, with freedom, with the choice to live their own damn lives. Hours later, they sat on the side of the road, staring up at a sky full of stars. Martha was gone. For good. "We did it," Hannah whispered. Mark nodded. "We're free." And for the first time in years, Hannah could actually breathe. The sadness was still there, but it didn't own them anymore. The past was just that, the past, and they chose to live.